The day the police opened my son's coffin, the world went silent. It was not the kind of silence that comes from respect. It was the kind that drops over a room when people realize they have been lying to themselves for far too long. The kind that makes every breath feel heavy. The kind that turns a church full of people into a single frozen photograph. The detective stood at the front of the chapel with his hand on the polished wood, and I heard my own heartbeat louder than the prayers, louder than the crying, louder than the shaking voice of my sister telling me I was humiliating the family. Then the lid began to rise. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Somebody gasped. Somebody else whispered my son's name like it was a prayer and a warning at the same time. I felt my knees go weak, but I did not move. I could not move. I had spent the last 11 days being told I was grieving, unstable, paranoid, and impossible to deal with. I had been told that I was ruining his service, disturbing the peace, and embarrassing the people who had already decided how my son's life and death were supposed to be remembered. Then the detective looked down into that coffin, and his face changed. I will never forget that face. It was not pity. It was not surprise. It was something much worse. It was recognition. And when he reached inside and pulled out the envelope hidden beneath my son's suit jacket, the whole room seemed to stop breathing at once. My daughter-in-law made a small sound behind me. My brother said, "Oh no," like he had just watched a wall collapse and realized it was coming down on him. The detective broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and began to read. "If anything happens to me, open the coffin." For a second, nobody understood what they were hearing. Then he read the next line. "They will try to bury the truth with me." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioner hum from the back of the chapel. That was the moment the world changed. But to understand why that envelope was inside my son's coffin, you have to understand how we got there. You have to understand my family. You have to understand my son. You have to understand how greed can put on a suit, speak softly, smile in church, and still destroy everything it touches. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and I spent most of my life thinking family meant the people who would never turn on you. I was wrong. My son was named Adam. He was 26 when he died, though even now my mind hates that number. It feels too small for what he carried. Adam was one of those men who made you believe the world could still be decent. He was the kind of son who called his mother's old friends just to ask how they were doing. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, filled the gas tank for strangers, and held the door open even when he was running late. He worked at my shop after college, not because he had to, but because he wanted to help. He wanted to build something honest with his hands. His mother died when he was 17. Cancer took her in a year and left our house full of quiet places. After that, it was just the two of us, and a big silence we learned to live around. We were not rich, not even close. We had enough. A small house, an old pickup, a repair shop I kept going with calloused hands and stubborn pride. That was our life, until my brother Victor came back into it. Victor was the oldest Mercer boy, the handsome one, the smooth one, the one who learned very early how to make a room bend around him. He had a better suit than me, better teeth than me, and the strange ability to make selfishness look like leadership. He had spent years working his way into the good graces of our late father, Leonard Mercer, who owned a string of properties outside Cleveland and liked to say he was leaving his legacy to the one who understood numbers. That was Victor, or so he thought. My father, near the end, had surprised all of us. He had rewritten pieces of his estate plan and set up a trust for Adam, not for Victor, not for my sister Marlene, for Adam. My son had been taking care of him during those last months, driving him to appointments, bringing him food, listening to his stories even when the old man repeated them 3 times in one evening. My father noticed. He said Adam was the only one in the family who still knew how to listen without waiting for his own turn to talk. That trust changed everything. Victor started acting like he had suddenly discovered the true meaning of family. Marlene started inviting us to dinners that felt more like interrogations. Her husband, Don, a lawyer with a soft voice and a hard smile, began appearing wherever estate documents were discussed. It was all very polite at first, a few questions here and there. A little concern about Adam being too young to manage money. A hint that maybe, just maybe, my father had not been in his right mind when he made the trust. They never said it directly. People like that never do. They don't stab you in the chest. They press a thumb into a bruise and call it love. Adam saw through them almost immediately. "Dad," he told me one night while we were closing the shop, "they keep asking me for copies of the trust papers." I looked up from the workbench. And I told them no. "Good." He hesitated. "Victor said it would be easier if I just let him help manage everything." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Victor would say it would be easier if everybody else just handed him the keys and thanked him for the privilege. Adam leaned against the counter and rubbed his neck. "I think he's mad about it." "He's not mad," I said. "He's threatened." My son smiled a little at that. "You always say things in the worst possible way." "That's because I'm usually right." He grinned, but the smile faded quickly. "I just don't want this to turn into one of those family wars where everybody pretends it's about love when really it's about money." I turned off the lamp over the engine block and looked at him. "Then don't give them the chance." He nodded, but I could tell something had already started to bother him. A week later, he called me from his car on the side of the road outside Mentor. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "I need you to listen carefully." I dropped the wrench. "What's wrong?" "I think Victor's hiding something." My stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. But he's moving money through the property accounts." I saw bank statements in his office when he left the door open. I didn't take anything, I swear, but I saw enough to know it wasn't normal. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure enough to be scared." I looked toward the shop window, where the late afternoon light was turning the floor gold. "Come home, right now. I'm on my way." Then, after a pause, he added in a lower voice, "If anything ever happens to me, don't trust them." I laughed because I thought he was being dramatic. I hate that laugh now. "Nothing is happening to you," I said, but he repeated it anyway, quieter this time. "Dad, seriously, I hear you." He was silent for a moment. "I'm not crazy." That line hit me harder than I expected. He had already begun to feel the family pressure. Victor had been calling him paranoid. Marlene had suggested he was stressed. Don had politely mentioned that grief sometimes made people suspicious. They were all doing the same thing, circling him with soft words and sharp intent, making him doubt what he had seen. "You're not crazy," I told him. "And you're not alone." He let out a shaky breath. "Okay." That was the last normal conversation I ever had with my son. The next morning, his truck was found down an embankment off Route 87, south of Paynesville. The county said he had probably swerved on a wet stretch of road and lost control. They called it an accident before the sun had even fully risen. By noon, Victor had already told people how devastated he was. By evening, Marlene was saying the family needed privacy. Don was advising everyone to let the authorities do their work. The funeral home was chosen before I had even found the strength to stand upright. I knew something was wrong the second they began moving too fast. That sounds simple now, but grief makes even your instincts feel crooked. Everyone told me I was seeing shadows because I was in pain. Victor hugged me in the parking lot of the hospital and said, "We all loved him, Dan." Marlene cried just enough to be believable. Don spoke in that measured legal tone that makes every sentence sound like a rule. "You should focus on honoring Adam's memory," he told me. "This kind of suspicion can tear the family apart." I stared at him and said, "My son is already torn apart." He flinched, just a little. The funeral home called it a closed service. Small family only, they said. Very private, very respectful. No open casket because the injuries were difficult. They used that word like it was a blanket they could throw over the truth. The first time I pushed back, Marlene pulled me aside in the hallway of the funeral home and put her hand on my arm. "Danny," she said, using the childhood version of my name, the way people do when they want you to feel small, "please don't make this harder than it already is." I stared at her hand. "Don't touch me." Her expression changed so quickly most people would have missed it. The grief mask slipped just enough for me to see annoyance underneath it. "Your son is gone," she said. "We all understand that. But you are becoming impossible. Impossible? You're talking about police conspiracy theories in front of funeral staff. You keep accusing Victor of things with no proof. You're upsetting everyone. Then let them be upset. She drew her hand back. This isn't about your feelings, Daniel. I took one step toward her and saw her eyes widen. Not fear exactly. Calculation. She was measuring whether I would make a scene. I said very quietly, everything you're doing is about my feelings. You just don't like which ones. She walked away before I could say anything else. That night I went through Adam's apartment with a flashlight and a bad feeling under my ribs. He kept his place neat. Too neat. He had an old coffee mug on the counter, his wallet on the table, his shoes by the door. Nothing looked like a man who had planned to leave his life behind. I found his phone on the charger. I found his watch on the nightstand. I found his jacket hanging on the back of a chair. In the inside pocket, tucked so far down I almost missed it, was a folded receipt from a notary office in Lake County. It wasn't dated that day. It was dated 3 days earlier. And on the back, in my son's handwriting, were 5 words. Don't let them rush me. I sat down so fast I nearly hit the floor. My first instinct was to call the police. My second was to call Victor. I did neither. Instead, I called a woman named Nora Briggs, a county detective I knew from years ago when she had once helped me recover a stolen truck. She was not a friend exactly, but she was honest. In my life, honesty had become more valuable than warmth. She met me at a diner off the interstate the next morning and listened while I told her everything. The trust, the statements, the phone call, the receipt, the strange speed of the funeral arrangements, the closed casket, the way my brother and sister were pushing for immediate burial. When I finished, she folded her hands around her coffee cup and studied my face for a long time. Mr. Mercer, she said, I'm going to be careful with this, because grief can make people see patterns that are not there. I know that, but... She tilted her head slightly. You do not sound delusional. That's your professional opinion? No. My professional opinion is that people who are trying to hide something often use the words crazy and unstable a lot. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She continued, if you want the county to consider reopening the death investigation, I need something more than a receipt and a family argument. What kind of something? Any sign of tampering? Any message from your son? Any financial motive we can document? I told her about the bank statements Adam had seen. Her expression sharpened. Bring me copies. There's more, I said. She waited. Victor isn't just hiding money. Adam thought he was moving property through shell accounts. Detective Briggs leaned back. That's serious. I know. Then get me the documents. I did not sleep that night. I spent it in the shop, going through old filing boxes, calling accountants, and looking for anything Adam might have left behind. Around 2 a.m, I found a manila folder in the locked drawer of his desk. The key was taped to the underside of the top drawer, something my son had once done when he was 16 and wanted me to stop worrying about forgetting things. Inside the folder were copies of property transfer forms, insurance policies, and a handwritten note in blue ink. If Victor finds this first, he'll say, I'm obsessed. Below that was a list of addresses and account numbers. And under that, in words that made my skin go cold, was this. He asked me to meet him alone at the lake house. He? No name. Just he. Adam had written the note in a hurry, like he didn't want to waste a second explaining it to himself. I took the papers to Detective Briggs before sunrise. She read them once, then again. Who's he? She asked. I don't know. Did your son have any enemies outside the family? No. Her eyes lifted. You answered too fast. I swallowed. He was not the kind of man who collected enemies. Not real ones. She nodded, filing that away. When was this note written? 3 days before he died. Then we need to know where he was going. Victor's lake house. Briggs stood up. I'll get a warrant for the vehicle and any financial records attached to the trust. You keep your phone on. She left me with a diner check and a headache I could feel behind my eyes. By the next afternoon, Victor had already heard rumors that I was working with the police. He called me himself. Dan, he said in that smooth, tired voice he used when he wanted to sound wounded. "What are you doing?" I stood in the driveway outside the house, phone pressed to my ear. "Looking for the truth about Adam's accident. If you know something, now would be a good time." There was a pause. Then he said, "I know you're hurting, but you need to stop this." "Stop what?" "This fixation. It's poisoning the rest of the family." "The rest of the family?" "Yes." I laughed in spite of everything. "You mean the part of the family that already has the money?" His voice cooled. "You're not thinking clearly." "That's funny," I said, "because Adam said the same thing about you right before he died." Victor inhaled sharply. "What did you just say?" "I said my son was scared of you." "That is not true." "It is. That boy was always dramatic when things didn't go his way." I looked across the street at the empty sidewalk and felt something in me harden. "Don't talk about him like that." "I'm trying to help you, Dan." "No, you're trying to shut me up." His tone sharpened, losing its polish. "Do you really think anybody's going to believe you over this family? You are the one acting unstable. Grief has made you paranoid. Your sister thinks you need rest. Don thinks you should speak to someone." I closed my eyes. "There it is." "What?" "The script." He was silent. "You all practiced it, didn't you? Crazy, unstable, grieving, confused. Same words, same order. I bet you rehearsed the concern in the mirror." "Daniel, don't." He exhaled, like he was restraining himself. "You are making a mistake." "No," I said. "You made one when you thought I would bury my son and go quiet." He hung up. The next day, Detective Briggs called me before noon. "We found something in the truck," she said. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles went white. "What?" "Your son's dash camera was disconnected after the crash, but the memory card wasn't destroyed. Someone tried to wipe it. Not successfully." My pulse jumped. "Can you recover it?" "We already did." There was a pause on the line. I could tell she was choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "your son was not alone at the lake house." I shut my eyes. "Who was there?" "I'm not ready to say yet." "Nora, listen to me carefully. Don't say anything to Victor. Don't say anything to your sister. And do not move the body." I wasn't planning to. "But you did mention the funeral home has the remains scheduled for burial tomorrow." "Yes. Cancel it." "I can try." "Don't try. Do it." I called the funeral director. He was polite in the way only terrified men are polite. When I said the burial was being delayed, he stammered something about family approval and legal complications. I told him the police were now involved. That ended the conversation. By evening, Marlene had arrived at my house with a casserole she did not make and a face full of outrage. "This has gone too far," she announced the second I opened the door. I didn't invite her in. "Then go home." "You canceled the burial?" "I postponed it." "Without consulting the family?" "You mean without consulting Victor?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Daniel, whatever you think you've found, let it go." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because you are going to destroy this family." "No," I said. "I think that already happened." Her cheeks flushed. "Adam was my nephew." "Yes, and somebody wanted him silent." She looked offended. "How dare you imply?" "He wrote that he was scared." She folded her arms. "Scared people write all kinds of things. Were you at the lake house?" Her eyes flicked away so fast most people would not have noticed. But I noticed. She recovered instantly. "Absolutely not." I stepped aside and let her see the porch light on my son's old jacket hanging by the door. "Then why are you nervous?" "I am not nervous. You're angry because you're acting like a lunatic." The word landed between us like a lit match. I almost smiled. There it is again. "Daniel, you should leave." She lifted her chin. "Victor is not the enemy." I looked at her for a long moment. "Then tell me who is." She had no answer. That night I got the first real glimpse of what my son had uncovered. Detective Briggs came to the shop after closing and spread photographs across my workbench. The memory card from Adam's dash cam had captured only a fragment, but it was enough. A dark sedan parked near the lake house driveway. 2 men in the driveway. One of them Victor. The other, a local contractor I recognized from a property maintenance firm. Adam's voice on the recording, tense and controlled, asking why money had been moved out of the estate account. Victor's voice low and irritated, telling him to stop digging. Then the image shook, the camera tilted, and the audio cut into chaos. Briggs tapped one photo. Your son got out of the truck. Then the camera went offline. I pointed to the contractor. Who is that? Name's Wade Heller. Works for a demolition company that does contract repairs on old properties. He's not talking yet. Yet? We brought him in for questioning. He asked for a lawyer before he finished saying hello. I stared at the image of Victor and felt the room narrow around me. He killed him, I said. Briggs held up a hand. We are not there yet. He killed my son. Maybe not. We need the rest of the evidence to make that stick. I turned away from the photos because if I looked too long, I thought I might break something. What did Adam say before the camera cut? Briggs pulled another sheet from her folder. It was a still frame from the audio analysis transcript. You told me this was just a meeting. Victor said, you should have listened when I tried to help you. Then another voice, one I couldn't identify, said, he knows too much. The blood in my ears was so loud I could barely hear Briggs speaking. The second voice? I asked. We think it might be Wade. No, I said. My son wrote down he. He didn't know Wade. He knew Victor. Briggs nodded once. Which means Victor wasn't working alone. The next few days were a blur of calls, paperwork, and the kind of grief that makes food taste like cardboard. The county secured temporary control over Adam's trust documents. Don began threatening defamation suits before any formal charges had even been filed. Marlene started calling relatives to explain that my mental state was not stable enough to handle the funeral arrangements. Victor stopped taking my calls entirely, which was somehow more frightening than if he had kept denying everything. Then came the anonymous letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, slid under my front door late one evening. Inside was a single sentence, typed in all caps. Check the lining of the coffin before they bury him. I stood in my kitchen staring at that line until the paper blurred in my hands. I called Detective Briggs immediately. Her voice was sharp before I even finished reading the note. Do not touch anything. I already touched it. Of course you did. She sounded tired, but not angry. Where is the envelope now? On the counter. Leave it there, I'm coming over. She arrived within 20 minutes, bagged the note, and looked at me with that steady, unsentimental expression detectives learn to use when emotions become liabilities. You got this during a very useful moment, she said. What does that mean? It means whoever sent it knew we were close enough to check the funeral arrangements. Or it means they finally got scared. Possibly. She studied me. Either way, I want the coffin unopened until we can verify this through the funeral director. Why would there be anything in the lining? Her mouth pressed into a line. Sometimes people hide documents, phones, jewelry, even recording devices in places they think nobody will check. My heart gave one hard thud. Adam could have done that. Yes, without telling me, he may have been protecting you. I didn't like that answer because it sounded too much like my son. He had always tried to carry weight quietly, as though the people he loved were already heavy enough. The funeral director, a pale man named Ed who looked as if he hadn't slept in a week, admitted that Adam's casket had been sent in for a final preparation by a private family representative the day before. Who? Briggs asked. Ed swallowed. Mr. Victor Mercer. My jaw clenched. Did he ask for anything unusual? Briggs said. Ed shifted in his chair. He requested the interior lining be secured. What does that mean? He said the family had valuables in the burial clothing and wanted to avoid loss. Valuables? I said. Ed looked miserable. That's what he said. Briggs stared at him. Did you see anything? His voice dropped. He was alone with the casket for maybe 10 minutes. Afterward, he told me not to worry about the paperwork because his attorney would handle it. Briggs stood. You should have reported that. I know. Did he take anything out? I don't know. She looked at me, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes. We need an exhumation warrant. My stomach lurched. We can do that? If the evidence supports it, yes. Then get it. There was a pause before she answered. "Mr. Mercer, once we do this, there's no turning back." I thought about my son in the back of a truck, my son writing warnings in the margin of receipts, my son being called crazy by the people who wanted his silence. I thought about the line in the note. "Check the lining before they bury him." I already lost turning back, I said. The warrant came through the next morning. By then, the family had gathered at the chapel for what should have been the final service. Marlene wore black silk and a face full of offended dignity. Don stood near the guest book, looking like a man preparing to challenge the universe in court. Victor arrived late, which told me more than anything else. People who are innocent arrive early. People who are guilty arrive after they have made sure the stage is set. He saw me at the front row and gave me the kind of expression you give someone who has embarrassed themselves in public and still doesn't know it. "You really went through with this?" he murmured as he passed. I did not look at him. "You should have thought of that before you killed my son." His steps faltered, just for a beat. Then he kept walking. That was all the confirmation I needed. Detective Briggs came in with 2 uniformed officers 10 minutes later. The whispers started immediately. Marlene went pale. Don stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Briggs held up the warrant. "County order. We are reopening the death investigation and conducting a limited examination of the burial container." Marlene stared at her. "You can't be serious." Briggs turned to the funeral director. "Open it." The room went dead silent. Victor's face changed first. Not fear. Not yet. Something subtler. A narrowing. An internal calculation as he measured what could be lost. Don recovered quickly. "This is outrageous." Briggs did not even glance at him. "Then you can file a complaint after we're done." Marlene's voice rose. "This is my nephew's funeral." Briggs looked at her then. "Then perhaps you should tell us why your brother requested the lining be secured." Marlene's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Victor stepped forward. "You have no right." Briggs cut him off. "Stand back." My hands were shaking so badly I had to lock them together. I do not remember the exact moment the lid moved. I remember the hinges. I remember the sound of fabric brushing wood. I remember one officer lifting the lining and the other shining a light into the narrow space around my son's body. Then I remember the detective's face. He saw something. I knew he saw something because his expression changed in a fraction of a second. Not horror, not disgust, surprise. Deep, hard surprise. He reached inside carefully and withdrew a small sealed envelope. Then another. Then a thumb drive attached to a silver chain. The room made a sound I will never forget. Not a word, not a scream, just one collective exhale of disbelief. Briggs looked at the envelopes, then at me, then back at the casket. "What is it?" I whispered. She opened the first envelope with gloved fingers. Inside was a notarized copy of my father's revised trust, the version no one in the family had been willing to acknowledge, the one leaving the bulk of the estate not to Victor, not to Marlene, not to Don, but to Adam, and in the event of Adam's death, to me as executor and beneficiary of record. There was a second page, handwritten by my father, saying he had changed his mind about Victor after discovering unauthorized transfers. The room erupted. Marlene gasped. Don said, "That's impossible," too loudly and too quickly. Victor did not speak. He just stared, a pale, dangerous kind of still. Briggs held up the thumb drive. "And this?" She plugged it into a laptop brought by one of the officers. The file opened with a single audio note. Adam's voice filled the chapel. "If you are hearing this, then they did it." The sound of my son's voice hit me like a physical blow. I had to grab the pew in front of me to stay upright. The recording continued. "Dad, if you're there, I'm sorry. I tried to handle it myself. I should have told you sooner. Victor and Don have been moving trust money into shell accounts for months. I found the transfers. I copied everything. They know I have it. If something happens to me, do not let them bury me quietly. Check the coffin. Check the lining. I put copies of everything there because I didn't know who to trust anymore. There was a rustle on the recording. Then Adam again, this time lower, closer to the microphone. And Dad, if they tell you I was confused, don't believe them. I'm not confused. I'm scared. The chapel was so silent after that I could hear someone crying in the back row. Victor suddenly broke. It was not a dramatic collapse. It was worse. He laughed once, a short, contemptuous sound, as if he still believed he could mock his way out of a cage. Then he said, "This is insane." Briggs turned toward him. "Is it?" He pointed at the laptop. "That could be forged." "Sure," she said. "Except it matches the text messages we just recovered from your phone." Every head in the room turned to Victor at once. His face went blank. Don stepped forward, his voice suddenly tight. "What messages?" Briggs opened a case file and read from it. "You need to keep him calm. The boy is getting suspicious. Wade, make it look like an accident." Victor's jaw flexed. Marlene whispered, "Victor?" He did not answer. Briggs continued. "We also recovered transfer records showing money moved from the trust into 2 private holding accounts. We found signatures tied to property documents you filed under a revised power structure that your father never approved." Don took a slow step backward. I looked at him and understood before he did. He was not just Victor's lawyer. He was part of it. Not the muscle, the wiring. My voice came out ragged. "You knew." He shook his head too quickly. "Daniel, listen, you knew my son was being watched. Now that's not fair. You helped him, didn't you?" Don swallowed. His eyes flicked to Victor and then away again. That was answer enough. Marlene stared at her husband with open disbelief. "Don?" He looked at her, and for the first time I saw real fear in him. Not fear of the law, fear of exposure, fear of being seen. Briggs snapped the lid of the laptop shut and turned to the officers. "Take them in." Marlene broke first. "No," she said, and then louder. "No, you can't just do this." Victor finally found his voice. "You're all making a mistake." I stood up so quickly the pew behind me rattled. He looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that almost made me pity him. Almost. "You did this to my son," I said. His face hardened. "Your son got too greedy." The room froze. I heard somebody actually whisper, "Oh my God." Victor took a breath, realizing too late that he had said the wrong thing. I walked toward him before anyone could stop me. Briggs shifted slightly, prepared to intervene, but I never raised my hands. I did not need to. "You murdered a child for money," I said. "Careful," he hissed. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." He leaned closer, and for one awful second I thought he might smile. Adam wanted to play hero. My vision narrowed. He wanted to protect what was his. Victor's eyes flashed. "Nothing was his until your father got sentimental." That was the last calm thing anyone heard him say. One of the officers grabbed his arm. Don tried to step away, but another officer was already there. Marlene began crying in a way that looked less like grief and more like panic. People started standing, some moving toward the exit, others staying rooted in place because they could not process what they were seeing. I turned back to the coffin. My son lay there in the dark lining, peaceful in a way that did not belong to the people who had tried to erase him. I reached out and touched the edge of the wood. Not his face, not his hands. I was not trying to disturb him. I was trying to say goodbye in the only language I had left. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I should have listened faster. The answer, of course, did not come from him. It came from the evidence. The next 6 weeks tore the family apart in public. Victor was charged with conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, and manslaughter. Wade Heller flipped the moment he realized Victor had no intention of protecting him. Don tried to negotiate, then tried to blame Victor, then tried to claim he had simply overlooked irregularities in the documents. That did not save him. It only made him look cowardly. Marlene was not charged at first, but once investigators went through the phone records, it became clear she had known enough to be guilty of willful blindness at the very least. She had helped keep Adam isolated. She had repeated the crazy story. She had done the thing families do when they do not want to get dirty. She had helped make my son sound unstable so no one would listen to him. The worst part was not the arrests. The worst part was hearing what Adam had gone through in his last days. Detective Briggs pieced it together for me because I could not have survived hearing it all at once. Victor had learned Adam was reviewing the old trust files. Don had spotted the access logs. They lured Adam to the lake house under the pretense of discussing a family resolution. The plan was to scare him, take the documents, and force him to sign a statement surrendering his claim. It escalated when Adam refused. Wade was supposed to drive him home after he calmed down. Instead, he was drugged with something meant to make the whole thing look like a simple accident if he ended up driving himself. When that did not go according to plan, Victor panicked. He and Wade left him there long enough for the story to become useful. The county accepted the crash theory because the scene had been staged to support it. Adam had fought them. Not with fists, with information. He had recorded enough to bury them if they tried to bury him first. He knew exactly what he was doing when he hid the copies inside the coffin lining. He had planned for the possibility that they would outmaneuver him in life, so he gave himself one chance to outlast them in death. That knowledge destroyed me and saved me at the same time. I went into his apartment after the funeral service was over and found the note he had left on the kitchen table for me in his handwriting, dated the day before he died. Dad, if you find this before they do, I'm sorry I made you carry this alone. I didn't want to scare you until I knew more. I love you. If you have to choose between my name and the truth, choose the truth. I need this to mean something. I sat there with the paper in both hands until night came through the windows. I did not cry right away. I think I had used up the first wave of tears at the chapel. Instead, I read the note over and over until the words stopped looking like ink and started looking like a heartbeat. After the trial began, the whole town wanted a story. Reporters came, lawyers came. People who had once laughed politely when Victor walked into a room now claimed they had always known something was off. That kind of moral amnesia is common. Everyone wants to be on the right side once the danger is gone. Victor's arrogance became his undoing. He kept believing he could talk his way through it. He kept trying to frame the case as a family misunderstanding, a business dispute, a tragic accident made worse by grief. But the evidence was not a rumor. It was paper, recordings, bank transfers, and digital trails. There was no poetic escape hatch, no dramatic speech that could erase what he had done. Justice in real life is slower and less cinematic than people think. It comes through motions and hearings and documents stamped in triplicate. But when it arrives, it has a weight that cannot be argued with. The prosecutor played Adam's recording in court. When my son's voice echoed through the room, Victor looked down for the first time. That was the closest thing to remorse he ever showed. Marlene testified against him after the state confronted her with the phone records. She cried on the stand and tried to make herself sound like a woman who had merely been deceived by her brother. But the record showed every text, every warning, every time she had chosen to protect the family image over her nephew's life. She was not innocent. Just not the one they finally put in handcuffs. Don's law license was suspended. Then the bar began a disciplinary proceeding. He tried to save himself by cooperating, but the cooperation came too late and sounded too much like self-preservation. Victor was sentenced to a long stretch in prison. Wade got less, but enough to lose everything he had ever pretended to be. Marlene kept her house, but not her reputation. Don lost his practice and, eventually, his marriage. That part surprised nobody except Marlene, who apparently thought loyalty could be bought forever if you paid in just the right currency. As for the trust, my father's wishes were finally honored. The money my son was meant to control was redirected after the court findings. We set up a foundation in Adam's name for vocational students and young people who had lost parents too soon and needed help staying in school. I did not want his memory tied to the family that had tried to erase him. I wanted it tied to the good things he had believed in. Work, honesty, second chances, the kind of help nobody sees until it keeps them from falling. The first scholarship went to a 17-year-old girl from Akron who wanted to study nursing and had been working nights at a diner after her father died. She wrote me a letter saying Adam's story made her feel like people who care quietly still matter. I kept that letter in my wallet for months. People asked me if I felt vindicated. That word never sat right with me. Vindicated sounds neat, almost clean. What I felt was something messier. Relief, grief, fury, peace, guilt, gratitude, and a kind of ache that never fully went away. Justice did not give me my son back. Nothing could do that. But it gave his name back to the truth. And that mattered. One afternoon, about a year after the funeral, Detective Briggs stopped by my shop unannounced. She stood in the doorway with her hands in her pockets and looked around at the same cracked concrete floor, the same tools, the same old smell of oil and metal. "You still working?" she asked. "Someone has to keep the town's cars alive." She nodded toward the framed photograph on the wall near the counter. It was Adam at 19, covered in grease, grinning with a wrench in his hand like he had just won something no one else could see. "I'm glad you kept that up. I almost took it down. Why didn't you?" I glanced at the photo. "Because he was real. I didn't want the world to get the last word." She smiled faintly, then reached into her bag and handed me a small box. "What's this?" "Something the evidence unit found in the lining of the coffin after the trial. It had your son's initials on it." My hands went numb as I opened it. Inside was Adam's old college ring and a folded scrap of paper. I unfolded it slowly. It was his handwriting again. "Dad, if you found this, it means you won." Below that, in smaller letters, "Don't let them make you small." I had to sit down. Briggs said nothing. She just stayed there while I looked at the paper until the tears came. Not the ugly, broken kind this time. The quieter kind. The kind that come when the fight is finally over and the body knows it is safe to feel what it has been holding back. I wish I could tell you that everything after that became easy. It did not. There are still nights when I wake up and reach for my phone because some part of me expects Adam to call. There are still moments when I remember the chapel, the lid lifting, the envelope in the dark, and I feel that same cold flash of disbelief. There are still days when a family gathering feels too loud, and a closed door feels too familiar, and I remember how quickly people I love chose comfort over truth. But there is also peace now. Not the peace of forgetting, the peace of knowing. Victor can sit in a cell and tell himself whatever story makes the mirror easier to face. Marlene can keep her silence and call it shame. Don can live with the knowledge that his careful words did not save him from the consequences of his own cowardice. And me? I live with the fact that my son was braver than the people twice his age who tried to crush him. I live with the fact that he trusted me enough to leave the truth where I would find it. I live with the fact that the day the police opened my son's coffin, the world really did go silent. Not because nothing mattered. For a long time after that, I kept the paper folded in my wallet like it was a second pulse. I would take it out in the middle of the night when the house was too quiet, smooth the crease with my thumb, and read the same 8 words again and again. Don't let them make you small. It was such a simple sentence. My son had written it like he was talking to me across a room, like he still knew I might need reminding that grief can shrink a man if he lets it. That part of me almost did shrink. For months after the trial, I avoided the chapel, avoided the lake road, avoided the courthouse steps where cameras had once flashed like lightning every time Victor was let in or out. I avoided family gatherings too, though after the arrests, there were not many of those left worth attending. Marlene called twice after the sentencing. I did not answer the first time. I answered the second because I thought maybe she had finally found the courage to say she was sorry. She did not. "Daniel," she said, and her voice sounded strained. "People are saying horrible things." I stared out the kitchen window at the little patch of grass Adam used to mow in neat, stubborn lines.
"People are saying the truth."
"You know that isn't fair." I laughed once, softly. "Fair? Victor ruined all of our lives." "No," I said. "He ruined his own." Silence followed. Then she said, in a voice so small I almost didn't recognize her, "I should have listened to Adam." That was the closest thing to an apology I ever got from her. "You should have," I said. She cried then. Not in a way that moved me, not enough to undo anything, just enough to remind me that guilt and love are not the same thing, and guilt arrives much later. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I closed my eyes. "That doesn't bring him back." No, it doesn't." When I hung up, I sat at the table for nearly an hour without moving. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock over the stove. I used to hate that clock because Adam had picked it out at a farm supply store when he was 15 and insisted it looked honest. After he died, I kept it because it was one of the few things in the house that still sounded like him in some strange, ordinary way. That winter, the county finally released the official report. The words were plain, almost ugly in their simplicity. Conspiracy, fraud, tampering with evidence, false reporting, unlawful pressure applied to the victim prior to death. The report never used dramatic language. It didn't need to. The facts were worse than drama. The facts said Adam had been right, and the people who called him unstable had been the ones building the lie. I read the report in my recliner with my glasses sliding down my nose, and when I got to the part confirming the hidden recordings in the coffin lining, I had to stop and set the pages down on my knees. It still amazed me, even then, that my son had managed to think clearly enough in the middle of that nightmare to plan ahead. He had known exactly how dangerous his own family had become. He had hidden proof inside his own burial clothes, because he understood something I did not at first. The people willing to use a funeral to seal a lie would never expect the truth to come knocking from inside the coffin. The newspaper made a story out of it for a while. The local station ran the case in the evening. People who had never spoken to me in their lives began waving from their cars, telling me they were sorry, telling me they had suspected Victor all along, telling me they knew Adam was a good man. I nodded at all of them because it was easier than saying what I really felt. Where were all of you when he was still alive? Where were you when he was being called crazy? Where were you when the family was smiling in public and slicing him apart in private? The truth is, most people only recognize courage after it has already been buried. The scholarship fund in Adam's name opened in the spring. We held it at a community college outside Cleveland, in a room with bad coffee, folding chairs, and a window that looked out over a parking lot. It was not grand, it was not fancy, it was perfect. The first student to receive the award stood beside me, while the dean read her name. Her hands were shaking. She was the same age Adam had been when he started helping me in the shop. She wore a thrift store blazer and shoes with worn heels, and when she accepted the envelope, she burst into tears the second she touched it. I thought I was done crying by then. I was wrong. After the ceremony, she came up to me with red eyes and said, "I never met your son, but I read what happened. He sounded like somebody worth knowing." I looked at her for a long moment before I could trust my voice. He was. She nodded like she believed me, and that simple kindness broke something loose in me that had been tight for months. "Thank you," she whispered. That night I sat in the parking lot after everyone else had gone and watched the lights go out one by one inside the building. The air smelled like wet pavement and spring grass. I thought about how my son's name was now tied to something that helped people instead of hurting them. And for the first time since the day we buried him, I felt like maybe the world had not swallowed him completely. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope from the prison system, stamped and flattened and handled too many times to feel personal. I almost threw it away because I didn't recognize the return address. But when I saw Victor's name on the back in tiny block letters, I stood there in the kitchen so long the kettle on the stove started whistling and I didn't even hear it at first. I opened it with shaking hands. "Danielle, I know you won't believe this, and maybe you shouldn't. I've had time to think. Time changes the shape of things." There was more on the page, but I stopped reading after the first line. Not because I was afraid, because I was angry. He had written as if time had made him wise, as if prison had turned a man who destroyed his own nephew into some kind of philosopher. I folded the paper so hard it creased under my thumb. Then I read the rest. I told myself I was protecting the family business. I told myself Adam would never understand how the world works. I told myself you would let it go. I told myself a lot of things. None of them were true enough. I know that now. For a second, I just stood there, breathing through my nose, staring at the ugly handwriting of a man who had finally run out of ways to lie to himself. The letter ended with a line that made my throat tighten. He was braver than I was. That was the first honest thing Victor had ever written in my direction, and it still wasn't enough to touch what he had done. I didn't reply. Some doors do not deserve an answer. A week later, Detective Briggs called me in the middle of the afternoon. "We found something else," she said. I was already halfway to my pickup before she finished the sentence. "What now?" It came from the financial records. There was a second account hidden under a business shell. Not in Victor's name, in your father's. I stopped dead in the shop doorway. "My father?" "Yes." I could hear papers rustling on her end. "Your father was moving money too. Not the same kind of fraud, but enough to complicate the whole story." My mouth went dry. "What kind of money?" She paused. "It appears your father was setting aside a private reserve to cover legal exposure if the estate challenge got messy. He may have known Victor was dishonest before he died." I closed my eyes. So he knew. Looks like he suspected a lot more than he admitted. I leaned against the doorframe. "Then why didn't he say something?" Briggs gave a small sigh. "Because people like your family are built on silence. Everybody thinks they can control the damage if they keep one more thing hidden." I looked around the shop, at the lifted hood of an old Ford I had been repairing for 3 days, at the shelves of tools Adam had once organized by size and shape, at the grease smear on the workbench where he had stood beside me, learning how to listen to a bad engine. All that time, all those years, and the men before us had been burying secrets under the same roof. Even now, I do not know whether that made me sadder or less surprised. Briggs left me with one final explanation. My father had suspected Victor was siphoning money long before Adam found the proof. He had set aside emergency documents because he feared the family might end up in court. That did not excuse anything. It only made the truth older than I wanted it to be. "Your son found the crack in the wall," Briggs said. He just wasn't the first person to notice the foundation was weak. I thanked her and hung up. then sat for a long time with my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands. I had spent so much of my life believing betrayal came like a lightning strike. Sudden, obvious, loud. But the real kind is quieter. It arrives as omissions, as polite smiles, as people refusing to say what they know, because saying it would cost them comfort. Sometimes the worst harm is not done by the person swinging the hammer. Sometimes it is done by the ones who stand nearby and say nothing while the wall comes down. I sold the lake house property after the criminal case closed. I couldn't stand to keep it. Every inch of that place felt polluted by the same false calm that had helped cover what happened to my son. I used part of the money to expand the scholarship fund. I used some to repair the shop roof. I put the rest in a savings account Adam would have called practical and unromantic, which is exactly why I did it. The first summer after everything ended, I finally went back to the cemetery alone. The grass was trimmed. The stone was clean. Someone had left a small bouquet of white daisies in a jar beside the marker, probably from one of the students who knew the story from the news. I stood there for a while with my hands in my pockets, staring at his name carved into the granite. Adam Mercer, 26 years old forever, in the eyes of anyone who looked at the stone, but not in mine. In mine, he was still 7 years old, running barefoot through the backyard, still 12, asking questions nobody else thought to ask. Still 17, solemn and patient after his mother died. Still 22, standing in the shop with grease on his cheek and determination in his shoulders. Still 26, warning me not to trust the family that smiled the widest. I placed my hand on the stone and said, "You were right." The wind moved through the trees behind me. I'm sorry it took me so long. I stood there until the sky began to turn gold at the edge of evening. When I left, I felt something I had not expected. Not happiness, not closure exactly, but permission. Permission to keep living without feeling like I was betraying him. Permission to tell the story without lowering my voice. Permission to say his name and not immediately taste blood in my mouth. There are still days when I think about what might have happened if I had believed him sooner. I think every parent carries that question after the kind of loss that cannot be repaired. What if I had pressed harder? What if I had followed the receipt earlier? What if I had listened when he first said he was scared? But grief is a thief that always asks the wrong question after it has already taken the answer. So now I ask a different one. What did my son leave behind? The answer is simple. He left behind proof. He left behind courage. He left behind a record of a truth too stubborn to stay buried. And he left behind a warning that still matters to me every day. Never confuse quiet with weakness. People like Victor counted on that. They counted on my son being polite, on me being worn down, on the family closing ranks around the lie until the lie became easier than the truth. They were wrong, because the truth has its own way of surviving. Sometimes it survives in a recording, sometimes in a bank statement, sometimes in a note hidden inside the lining of a coffin, and sometimes it survives in the man left behind, standing in an empty shop at dusk, holding a folded piece of paper and refusing to disappear. That is what I became after everything happened. Not the broken father they tried to make me into. Not the foolish old man they expected to bury with the secret. Just the last witness. And that was enough to bring them all down. I thought the story ended at the cemetery. It didn't. That night, after I came home from Adam's grave, I found another envelope waiting in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in Victor's sharp, uneven handwriting. I stood under the porch light for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single page. Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because I need you to know something I never said out loud. Adam came to see me the night before everything fell apart. He was calmer than I was. He asked me one last time to stop moving the money and turn everything over. He said if I did that, he would make sure the family business survived. He said he did not want to destroy me. I told him he was too late. That was the truth that broke him. I stared at those words until the page began to tremble in my hands. Not because I felt sorry for Victor, because I realized exactly how much cruelty can fit inside one ordinary sentence. He had not just lied. He had chosen the moment when my son was trying to save the family from itself and turned it into an excuse for violence. He had looked at Adam's mercy and answered it with punishment. The letter went on. I know you'll think I'm trying to soften what I did. I am not. I am trying to tell you that he was not afraid of me. He was disappointed in me. That was worse. I folded the paper and set it on the kitchen table. I sat down across from it with both hands wrapped around my coffee mug, even though it had gone cold hours earlier. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the truth had finally become so ugly it almost looked simple. Adam had tried to save him. That was what gutted me. My son had walked into the mouth of a family that was already eating itself alive and still tried to pull them back from the edge. Even then, with every reason to be angry, he had left a way out. Victor had refused it, and that refusal had cost my boy his life. The next morning, I took the letter to Detective Briggs. She read it in silence, then tapped the page with her fingertip. He's trying to bargain with his conscience, she said. That's what you call it? That's what it looks like. I stared out the station window at the parking lot, where a few cars sat under a washed-out sky. Does it matter now? End of section window. End of quote. Went our comment too. It matters for the record, she said. Not for his soul, if that's what you mean. I nodded slowly. Briggs slid the paper back across the desk. There's something else. I looked up. What now? The contractor, Wade, finally told us what happened in the final minutes before your son died. My chest tightened. And? He said Adam wouldn't sign the transfer papers. He said Adam kept asking why his own family would do this to him. He said your son was crying, but he never begged. I closed my eyes. Briggs continued in a lower voice. Wade said Victor got angry when Adam called him a coward. My throat felt thick. He was right. Briggs didn't answer that. She just let the silence sit between us because sometimes silence is the only honest witness left. When I got home, I found Marlene on my porch. That surprised me more than seeing Victor's letter. She looked older than I remembered, her face thinner, her shoulders rounded inward like she had spent months trying to become smaller inside her own skin. I'm not here to fight, she said before I could speak. I almost told her to leave anyway. Instead, I stood aside and let her in. She did not sit down right away. She stayed near the doorway, looking at the little framed photo of Adam on the wall. I kept thinking, she said, that if I stayed quiet long enough, this would all become less real. I didn't respond. I know that sounds pathetic. It sounds familiar. She let out a shaky breath and wiped under one eye with the heel of her hand. Victor wrote to me too. I turned slowly. What did he say? That he was sorry I got dragged into it. I waited. She laughed bitterly. That was his apology. I got dragged into it. Not I helped. Not I knew. Not I lied. Just dragged. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. And I'm tired, Daniel. She looked at me with the kind of honesty I had not seen in her for years. I'm tired of acting like what happened was some terrible accident nobody could have stopped. I'm tired of hearing my own voice in my head, repeating the things we said about Adam. That he was overreacting. That he was emotional. That he was confusing grief with suspicion. Her eyes filled again. We did that to him. I said nothing, because the truth was too close to something I had already buried and dug up too many times. Marlene stepped forward, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting the family. No, I said quietly. You were protecting the image of the family. She flinched because she knew I was right. I hated how much he reminded me of my father, she whispered. He had that same stubborn way of seeing through people. I think that scared Victor. I think it scared me too. I looked at her for a long time. Adam was never the threat. I know that now. Now. She nodded, tears spilling over. I know. There was a long pause. Then she said, I gave the prosecutor everything I had left. Emails, voice messages, old texts, things I should have turned over from the beginning. That caught me off guard. Why? She swallowed hard. Because I can't be the person who kept helping bury him. I looked at her then, really looked. There was no polished innocence left in her face. No easy self-defense. Just a woman who had finally run out of lies she could live inside. For the first time since Adam died, I believed she might actually mean it. It didn't erase anything. Nothing could. But it changed the shape of the room. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded card. Because I want you to have this. I took it and opened it. It was Adam's handwriting. Not a letter, just a list. 3 scholarship names. 2 business contacts. 1 line at the bottom. If they ever stop fighting, maybe they can still build something good. My hands went still. Marlene had found it in an old folder of his notes, tucked behind tax documents and estimate sheets from the shop. He had written it months before he died, before the lake house, before the panic, before any of us knew how deep the rot really went. I read the line 3 times. Then I folded the card and put it in my shirt pocket. Marlene stood there like she wanted to say more, but whatever she had left to say had run out in the doorway. At the door, she turned back and asked, "Do you think he ever knew we loved him?" I answered, before I could stop myself. "Yes," I said. "I think that was the problem." She covered her mouth and cried harder than before, but she nodded because she understood exactly what I meant. Adam had loved us enough to keep trying. That was what made everything worse. That winter, the case finally reached its final judgment. Victor took a plea after the last major financial records came in. The deal did not save him from prison, and it did not save him from being the villain in every article that mattered. Don resigned in disgrace. Wade lost his license to contract for county properties. The last of the money was clawed back where it could be, though enough had vanished into private accounts and fees and hidden transfers that some of it would never return. The law could not fix all of it, but it could mark it. And sometimes a mark is the closest thing society gets to accountability. I was there for sentencing. Victor looked smaller than I remembered, but not humbled. That was important. Time had not made him noble. It had only made him tired. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he stood up slowly and looked over at me. For a second, I thought maybe he would finally apologize in front of everyone. Instead, he said, "My family wanted me to be something I was not." The room went cold. He continued, "I made mistakes, but I was not the only one involved." That was when I understood he would remain exactly what he had always been. A man who could not stop reaching for someone else's throat even while the cuffs were being fastened. I stood up before the deputy told me not to. Victor looked at me, maybe expecting me to shout, maybe expecting me to collapse. Instead, I said, "My son gave you a chance." His face twitched. "He tried to stop this from becoming what it became," I said. "And you answered him by calling him a problem." Victor looked away first. That was the only victory I needed in that room. Not a speech, not revenge, just the sight of him, unable to meet my eyes while the judge read the sentence. Afterward, outside the courthouse, a reporter asked me whether I felt relieved. I told her the truth. "No," I said. "I feel tired." She asked whether I forgave them. I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't the same as pretending. Then she asked if I thought Adam would have wanted all this public. I looked up at the gray sky and thought about my son's voice on the recording, steady even when he was scared. I thought about the note in the coffin lining. I thought about the scholarship fund. I thought about the students who would never know his face, and yet would keep moving because of what he left behind. Yes, I said. I think he would have wanted the truth to survive. That night I went back to the shop and turned on every light. I stood there in the glow of the work lamps, the old tools hanging on their hooks, the smell of engine oil and metal in the air. And I felt Adam everywhere in that room, in the neat rows of sockets, in the stack of invoices by the phone, in the half-finished engine he had been helping me rebuild before everything went wrong. I picked up his wrench from the bench. It still had his initials scratched into the handle. I held it for a long time, then set it back down in the exact same place he liked to keep it. The silence in the shop was different now. Not empty, not haunted, just honest. That's the part nobody tells you about surviving betrayal. The world does not return to what it was. It returns to something else, something rougher, quieter, more real. You do not get your old life back. You get the chance to build a new one out of the pieces that were left. So that is what I did. I kept the shop open. I kept the scholarship going. I kept Adam's name tied to something useful. And every year on the date they opened the coffin, I go to the cemetery alone, stand by the stone, and tell my son the same thing. They tried to bury the truth with you. They failed. Then I tell him the rest. About the students. About the shop. About the people who learned too late that a good man can be quiet and still be stronger than the loudest liar in the room. And before I leave, I add one more thing. Because I owe him that much. You were never the problem.